Stepmom labeled me the disappointment at my dad's party, so I did this. I wasn't planning to stay long. My dad's birthday party had always been more of a performance than a celebration, a show designed by my stepmom Stephanie, who treated every gathering like a photo op. I figured showing up, saying hello, staying just long enough to be seen, and then ducking out quietly would keep the peace. I kept telling myself it would be fine. Just wear a decent shirt, bring a bottle of wine, smile when spoken to, and blend into the background. Like always. But that's not how it played out. By the time I arrived, the house was packed. Streamers in gold and black draped across doorways, a massive catering table set up with personalized napkins, and champagne flutes on silver trays. It looked more like a retirement gala than a birthday party. I paused in the doorway for a second, just long enough to take it all in. Stephanie thrived in this chaos, squealing with laughter, air-kissing every guest like a politician working a crowd. My dad. He stood at the bar with his golf buddies, puffing his chest and retelling the same old stories, surrounded by nodding heads and fake laughter. I walked in alone. No warm greetings. No hugs. Just a few nods, half-hearted smiles from people who barely remembered my name. That had become the norm. I wasn't angry. I had stopped expecting much years ago, but it still stung a little. I spotted the table where Stephanie had set up the name tags. She always added these little touches to make her parties feel more organized, more curated. Most tags were basic and harmless. Uncle Tom, Cousin Rachel, Neighbor Denise. Then I saw mine. It didn't just say Derek. It said, Derek, the disappointment. I froze. For a moment, I stood completely still, staring at that piece of paper like it couldn't possibly be real. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone else named Derek was coming. Maybe it was meant to be ironic. But then I heard the unmistakable clink of a wine glass being tapped and Stephanie's laugh carrying across the room like a siren. When I looked up, she was already watching me. That smug little smile on her face, the kind that says, I win. She wasn't joking. This wasn't a prank. This was a calculated move. A public branding. And no one, none of the guests, none of the family members, said a word. They either looked away, too awkward to acknowledge it, or smiled uncomfortably and went back to sipping their drinks. That told me everything I needed to know. I carefully placed the name tag back on the table, like it might bite me. My hands felt numb. I didn't want to make a scene, but something in me snapped. Not in a loud, chaotic way, more like a quiet clicking into place. Something final. I scanned the room, spotted a passing server with a tray of champagne, and grabbed a glass. Then I stepped into the center of the room, the hum of small talk starting to quiet around me. I tapped my nail against the glass. I'd like to make a toast, I said, my voice louder than I expected. The conversation died. All eyes turned toward me. Stephanie adjusted her necklace and turned fully toward me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. My dad blinked in surprise. A few people whispered, probably assuming I was about to do something awkward and harmless. I raised the glass. To my dad, to Stephanie, and to everyone here who ever made me feel like I was nothing more than a prop in my own family's production, I said, thank you for reminding me exactly where I stand. I hope this is the last time any of you ever see me. There was a stunned silence. Stephanie's smirk cracked just slightly. My dad opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Several guests looked around uncomfortably, unsure if they should applaud, cringe, or pretend they hadn't heard. I downed the champagne in one smooth sip, placed the glass on a side table, and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked sharply against the polished floor. No one followed me. I got in my car, turned off my phone, and drove home in silence. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt like I had finally stopped auditioning for a role that was never written for me. The drive home felt unreal. I didn't turn on music, didn't call anyone, didn't even check my phone. I just drove, hands firm on the wheel, watching the headlights skim past rows of sleeping houses. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I'd actually said something that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't rage. It wasn't a rebellion. It was just truth, something that had been building inside me for years, finally given a voice. When I stepped into my apartment, the silence there felt different, calmer. I dropped my keys on the counter, sat on the edge of the couch, and exhaled like I hadn't breathed in hours. I didn't turn on the lights. The glow from the street lamp outside was enough. I just sat in the dark, letting the moment settle over me like a heavy blanket. My phone buzzed once. It was a missed call from my dad. No voicemail. No text. Just a single, uncertain attempt. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then set it face down on the table. I wasn't ready to give him the stage again, not yet. Maybe not ever. The next morning came slowly. I made coffee, pulled out an old notebook, and started writing without much thought. Not a letter, not a rant, just observations. A timeline of disappointments. The way Stephanie used to correct me in front of guests. How my dad would laugh at her jokes, even when they were about me. The years of trying to prove myself to people who had already decided who I was. Somewhere in that flood of memories, I realized I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. I didn't need to explain why I left, why I spoke up, or why I didn't plan to come back. Later that afternoon, I checked my messages. One was from my cousin Rachel. "Hey, I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. And I think it was brave. You didn't deserve that." Another came from my aunt. A short but sincere, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything. You were right to walk out." More followed. Quiet acknowledgments from people who had been in the room. Some admitted they laughed nervously. Others said they hadn't noticed the name tag but believed me now. No one defended Stephanie. No one said I was overreacting. But from my dad? Nothing. Not a message. Not an explanation. Just that one missed call in the middle of the night that now felt like a lifetime ago. It should have hurt. But honestly, it didn't. It just confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't sorry. He was just surprised I finally stopped letting it slide. Over the next few days, the fallout unfolded in fragments. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just little tremors, a text here, a screenshot there, that showed me how people really felt when no one was watching. First came Rachel again. She messaged me a photo of the name tag, still sitting on the table, untouched. "Stephanie left it there all night," she wrote. Like it was decoration. She didn't say more. She didn't have to. Then came a message from my Uncle James. He'd always been one of the quieter ones at family events, polite, a little withdrawn. He wrote, "I've always admired how you carried yourself, even when others didn't treat you fairly. I'm sorry I didn't speak up." It wasn't some grand apology, but it hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about finally being seen. Meanwhile, Stephanie had apparently been trying to do damage control. A mutual friend forwarded me a post she made on Facebook, something vague about not everyone being able to take a joke, and some people needing to lighten up. The caption was paired with a group photo from the party, everyone smiling like nothing had happened. My dad stood right beside her, arm around her waist, grinning. Not once did either of them reach out directly. No call, no message, no explanation. But others kept trickling in. People I hadn't spoken to in years, some cousins, a former neighbor, even a co-worker of my dad's who had been at the party. They all said the same thing in different ways. "You didn't deserve that. You were right to speak up. I wish I had your courage." I started to wonder if maybe I wasn't the only one who had been quietly suffocating all these years, just the only one who finally stepped outside for air. That weekend, I went for a long walk through the park, needing to clear my head. The air was crisp, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe deeply without guilt clinging to the back of my throat. I passed by a small family gathering near the lake, balloons tied to a bench, cake on a picnic table. Laughter everywhere. No one is pretending. It hit me, then, that not all families operate on shame and silence. Some are built on kindness. Some actually want each other to feel welcome. I sat on a bench nearby and just watched for a while, letting that realization sink in. Maybe I hadn't lost a family. Maybe I just finally left the wrong one. Update. 2 weeks passed. The silence from my dad became its own kind of answer. It wasn't just absence, it was choice. I checked my phone more often than I cared to admit, half expecting a text or voicemail that never came. At first, I told myself he needed time. Maybe he was processing. But deep down, I knew. He wasn't calling because he didn't want to. Or worse, because he didn't think he should have to. What had come, however, was an unexpected message from my dad's assistant. She reached out to let me know there was a family dinner planned in a few weeks. Formal. Catered. "You're welcome to attend," she wrote. Stephanie wanted to extend the invitation. Stephanie, not my dad. It was like they were doubling down on the performance, hoping that if they just kept hosting events and taking pictures, the narrative wouldn't change. That if I showed up, everything would look the same on the outside, even if it had completely cracked beneath the surface. I didn't respond. Instead, I revisited the writing I had started after the birthday party. I kept journaling, but it had grown into something else, a letter, a reflection, maybe even a manifesto. I was finally naming things I had buried for years, times I'd been humiliated, overlooked, treated like a footnote in my own story. One line stood out to me every time I reread it. "You can't heal in the same place that broke you." That line became the core of something new. I posted a snippet of it on a small blog I had abandoned years ago, just for myself, Or so I thought. But within days, messages started coming in. People resonated. Strangers. Friends, I hadn't heard from you in ages. One woman wrote, I walked away from my mother for the same reason. Thank you for making me feel less alone. The words weren't revenge. They were connected. One day, while scrolling through messages, I saw an email with a subject line that stopped me cold. I read your blog. I'm sorry. It was from my dad. The email wasn't long. He didn't defend Stephanie. He didn't try to rewrite what happened. He didn't even ask me to come back. All it said was that he had seen the post, that he'd thought a lot about it, and that he realized how much he had let slide over the years. I don't expect a response, he wrote. But I do want you to know I'm listening now. I didn't know how to feel. The apology was late, but it was real. I didn't write back right away. I wasn't ready, but I saved the email. That night, I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and reread the piece I had posted. Not to edit it, but to honor it. It was mine. And for the first time, my story wasn't about them. It was about me. After my dad's email, I carried a strange mix of emotions with me: validation, grief, relief, and something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Not over him or Stephanie or the way the rest of the family might spin the story, but over what came next. That was mine now. I didn't reply to his message. I wasn't being spiteful. I was just choosing not to jump back into a dynamic that always made me feel small. There was power in not reacting, power in pausing, power in deciding that my peace mattered more than their timeline. The blog continued to grow quietly. I started posting weekly entries, some about the party, others about memory, boundaries, and letting go of people who never tried to hold you properly. It became a routine, something grounding. My words weren't loud or angry. They were quiet and sharp, honest. They reached people in places I never expected. One day, I got a handwritten letter in the mail, an actual letter, from someone who had read one of my posts. She said she'd left a controlling family years ago and never knew how to talk about it. My words helped her tell her own story to her kids. That's when I knew I wasn't just venting anymore. I was building something. Then came another unexpected twist. My younger cousin, Ben, just out of college, messaged me asking to meet. We hadn't spoken much in years, but he always seemed observant, a little quiet in a family that preferred noise. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. He sat across from me, nervous at first, then just honest. He told me he'd been struggling with the same things, feeling like you didn't belong. Like the family he grew up in was all about image and surface-level support. He said my post hit him like a mirror. We talked for hours. It didn't feel like trauma bonding. It felt like finally being able to speak a language someone else understood. We agreed to keep in touch. I promised to send him anything I was working on. He said he might start writing too. That night, I looked around my apartment, still modest, still quiet, and felt a kind of fullness that had nothing to do with how much space I had. I'd been told my whole life that family meant sticking together, even when it hurt. But I've learned something else. Sometimes, family isn't who raised you. It's who sees you. And once you're seen, really seen, there's no going back to being invisible. Update. It's been almost a year since that party. Sometimes, I still think about the moment I saw that name tag. How quiet the room got when I made my toast. How loud the silence was when I walked away. It doesn't haunt me anymore, but it shaped me. Since then, I've kept writing. The blog turned into a newsletter. The newsletter grew into a small community. People started sharing their own stories about family roles, boundaries, and walking away without looking back. It was like we had all been waiting for permission to speak out loud. I gave myself that permission. And now, I share it with others. My dad never followed up. The one email stayed in my inbox, unopened since that first thread. I didn't block him. I just chose not to chase closure from someone who hadn't earned that part of me anymore. I think he expected I'd come around eventually. Maybe show up to another party, pretend nothing happened. But I never did. And then came the wedding invite. Not mine, of course. My stepsister Stephanie's daughter, Emma. We'd never been close. She grew up in that house, and Stephanie ran like a stage. I figured it was more about protocol than sentiment. The invite arrived by mail, with gold trim and cursive font. A note scribbled at the bottom in my dad's handwriting. Would love to see you there. Let's talk. I held the card in my hands for a while. It didn't hurt. It just felt detached. Like they were still sending out scripts, still waiting for me to play my old role. I declined. I didn't send a dramatic letter. Didn't post a public explanation. I just said no. Because sometimes the strongest boundary is the quiet one. Ben and I still talk. He's writing now, short essays, some poetry. He's even guest written a few posts for the blog. We joke that we're the family we wish we'd had growing up. And in a way, we are. I also started volunteering at a local writing center. mentoring teens who need a place to tell their stories. Some of them remind me of myself at that age. The version of me who thought staying silent was safer. He wouldn't recognize me now, and that's a good thing. This year, on my dad's birthday, I made a different kind of toast. I went out for dinner with friends, chosen family, really, and raised a glass not to the past, but to the distance I'd built between me and the people who only saw me as a disappointment. Because I wasn't. I never was. And I didn't need them to see it. I just needed to see it for myself. My thoughts. This story isn't about revenge. It's about clarity. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is quietly walk away from people who never truly saw you and never go back. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just stopped showing up for a family that stopped showing up for him. And in doing so, he created space for something better. Have you ever been disrespected by your own family and decided enough was enough? Would you have walked out like he did or stayed for the sake of keeping peace? Let us know in the comments.